Good morning, and it's very nice to see all of you. And hello, Sunnyview. I'm so impressed with this event. I think to have put all of this together and to have assembled so many people here in Torremolinos is really impressive. And the agenda looks absolutely fantastic today. So huge congratulations in advance to the organising team. And I'm very honoured that you've included us in your agenda today. So thanks very much. Welcome. I hope you're all going to have a marvellous day. And we're talking about the future. So it's not a bad place to start at the beginning of a new school year. So let's start by thinking about the future. And to think about the future, let's think about some of the journey that we've taken over the last few years. The future is happening now. So I'll just invite you for a second to think just over the last generation. So let's say the last 25 years or so. Think of jobs that have only existed within the last 25 years that didn't exist before. So just see how many you can bring to mind. This isn't a test, this isn't a workshop, so I'm going to give you some of my answers and see how many of them. Perhaps put your hand up if you see one that corresponded to one that you had on your list. So this was my little list. Okay, put your hand up if one of the ones corresponds to one that you came up with. All right, and quite a lot of different ones as well, which is sort of testimony to the speed of change that we're living with at the moment. There's been an enormous acceleration in the role of technology in most of these new jobs that have existed only for 20, 25 years or less in several cases. And there was an interesting statistic that came up in research that UNESCO and the World Bank did a few years ago. We're almost actually at the end of this period now, but it said that 65% of children aged 12 today will do jobs that don't yet exist. Now, that doesn't mean to say they'll do jobs in 2-3 years from now, because this was back in 2015, but during their career, they'll do jobs that don't yet exist. I don't know whether you have done or are doing jobs that didn't exist a generation ago or more, but at least parts of your job probably didn't exist. And there are very, very many people in the world whose jobs didn't exist at all. When I entered publishing very, very many years ago, I was, I think, the last generation. I did a diploma in publishing to start my journey through the industry. And I think I was the last generation of student to learn hot metal typesetting. And that was where my career was. And there had been really very little fundamental change in the business of printing and publishing in its core methodologies since the 15th century, really. And I could not have predicted that during my own career how much publishing would have been revolutionized, particularly by the advent of technology, of course. And I sort of used to curse myself as a salesperson that for 500 years, sales representatives for publishing had only had to deal with books and print. And suddenly, in the middle of my career, what were the chances? But it happened just whilst it was on my watch that suddenly everything was upset and I had to deal with digital publishing and whole new ways of working. In the end, I thought that was, I learned to think that was more of a blessing than a curse, but it took a little bit of adjustment for all of us, and I think it continues to do so. I hope that the sound for this will work. As an introduction really to where I want to take us next, I don't know if you've heard this before. Jack Ma, he's retired now, but he is the founder and CEO of Alibaba, one of the largest online retailers in the world. And at the World Economic Forum in 2018, he said this, and I think it was very prescient. And either you'll hear him say it, or you'll hear me saying what he said, rather less interestingly. Whoops, no, it looks as like, I don't know if I can launch the video. It's better if you hear him doing it, but I don't think I'll be able to do it. No, don't worry then. What he said was this. He said, education is a big challenge now. If we do not change the way we teach, in 30 years from now, we'll be in trouble because the way we teach, The things we teach our kids are the things of the past 200 years. It's knowledge-based. And we cannot teach our kids to compete with machines. They're smarter. We have to teach something unique so that a machine can never catch up with us. And that is going to be, if you like, the key thread through what I'm going to talk to you about this morning. That it's asking us to do a fundamental reset in terms of the way in which we think of the content of education, without changing the core values, but changing some of the modes of delivery and some of our approaches to content. So first of all, briefly, I'm going to talk about managing change, what it is and what it isn't, or some examples. So some of you, I don't know if you've ever been, but you'll be aware of some of the very big technology in education conferences. BET is the very big one in the UK. In the US, there's one called South by Southwest Education Conference, and it's all about educational technology and innovation. And it really is, lots of it is very blue sky. It's very exciting. What's just over the horizon, virtual reality, the metaverse, and remote teaching technologies and so on. And there is a lot of very sophisticated, very clever stuff that's coming. But it's not coming for most of us anytime immediately soon. What technology really means and what technology really changes is only a small part of what we need to integrate when we're thinking about the future. And technology in many cases, or the next step in people's journey to technology, can often be very, very small. Let's start with the most successful, I think almost unarguably, the most successful ed tech product ever. These were its features. It accelerated dissemination of knowledge faster than anything and wider than anything before it. It's already in its seventh iteration, its seventh generation of product. It was the first EdTech product to incorporate these fundamental features, which we think now as being integrated in our expectations of technology in the classroom. And can anyone guess what this revolutionary, world-changing EdTech product was? We have a voice from the back. No, it's older than the internet. The ballpoint pen, it's older than that. The printing press. I think we can give that as the answer. It's the book. And you can think of ways, you may think, well, what does he mean by that? But in some form or another, the book was clearly was an absolutely revolutionary technology. And you can do things like interactivity, like when books which parents read to their child, or books which invite people to communicate with each other, or books that have alternative pathways through them and so on, so personal learning routes. Obviously, the words that we think of now as being figurative, like bookmarking and note-taking virtually, of course, were all literal, original iterations through the book. So the book is an incredibly resilient technology, and in many cases should be the technology of choice in very many pedagogical decisions. The book has an incredible life still ahead of it, fortunately for people like me. So my message on the technology side, which I'm not going to labour today because I want to move on somewhere else, is start where people are now, small revolutions. Add technology by piece to your existing reality. Some people are very wowed and tempted by big technology leaps. But I think that there's much more risk and typically much more cost in those big leaps than there are in small incremental adoptions of technology. And this one is a reflection from a publisher as much as anything else. Deliver solutions that are one step ahead of the market, not five, because you'll all know about bell curve distribution, and most people are in that bit in the middle. So that the people who are creating the generative AI, the virtual reality labs, and so on, they're only capturing 2-3% of the market, and they're making a loss for a long time before the market catches up. You need that vision, but it's not where people are. Where people are is little things like this, that a primary school library that decides to go digital because they never had enough copies when they needed a class set. And when they bought that class set, they used it for 1 week, and for 51 weeks, it sat on a shelf. Suddenly you have enough copies. You have a library that's open 24/7, 365. Suddenly you can have students accessing whatever books they like all through. So simple technology, but a really practical next step. Or another case, which was one of the first sort of light bulb moments for me in those early days when we moved to technological delivery of content was interactive workbooks. And first of all, I thought, oh, an interactive workbook, it's just a workbook on a screen. And then somebody said to me, well, of course, what that means is that there are very many exercises that the students can do on their own, that they can be marked by the workbook itself, and the teacher wins their evenings back. And suddenly that felt like a really valuable aspect of technology. And not only that, but the student gets hints and gets the answer at the moment at which they're engaged with the content. If you do the feedback from the workbook 3 days later when you have your next lesson, the student's no longer deeply engaged with that question. They only want to know what their mark was. And so if you're giving them hints at the point at which they're doing it, more learning is happening. So simple, small things about technology, which are not to do really with the mechanics of the technology, they're to do with good outcomes. So I think that when we talk about futures, we need to think from the start about students' current realities. And I quite like this little illustration that I saw in a post. I find it very sad, because the thing that saddens me is that there's a cross put against that exercise, where what's happened is the teacher hasn't taken account of the student's everyday reality. The student has drawn exactly what they see. Now, it could be that the teacher is frustrated because they've spent 2 lessons teaching the time and where hands on the clock go, and the student has completely ignored all of that. But I think there are a couple of things that it reminds us, is that students are, to use the cliche, digital natives, and we need to take account of that and think about ways in which we do things differently, to take account of the fact that it's not our past, it's not our knowledge that will shape their futures. It's taking a view of where they're going and starting to look forward, not back, which is very difficult in education, because education spends a lot of its time, I'll come back to in a moment, looking back rather than forward. And teachers are comfortable with what they know, and it's very uncomfortable to be off home base and to be adventuring towards what the students know. And one practical aspect of this is, it's in a way surprising that 50 years after the advent of personal computers, nearly, it's still really quite small. Well, it's probably a minority of schools, certainly globally a minority of schools, that integrate any lessons of computer studies throughout the curriculum. And you would think that in the modern world that begins to feel more and more essential. And so being able to introduce something, we have a curriculum now that goes all the way through from the start of primary to right up to A level, if you were to choose to do it. There are lots of practical difficulties, which I don't underestimate. Finding computer studies teachers is in itself one of the big issues, although that too now can be addressed through an aspect of technology which is becoming increasingly present and valuable, which is partnering with a a virtual school or an online school to do hybrid delivery of content. So for computer studies, you could partner with a school that can lend you their computer studies expert teacher and have your students learning together with that teacher. If you can't find or you can't justify a computer studies teacher, you know, we're much more, the geometry is far more variable than it used to be. You all have opportunities to teach beyond your own walls these days. And as schools, you all have the opportunity to think about bringing external people into your school where the need arises, where it allows you to, for instance, broaden your curriculum by offering new subjects. So I'm not going to go further down that line, but I'm just leaving that thought because I want to get on to sort of more what's my own home ground. One more comment then before we go, because in a way it's sort of the elephant in the classroom, is AI. Because this is the latest technology struggle that every teacher, every school is having to deal with. And I think the one thing that you can't do is hold back the waves. It's tempting to say AI is a threat, AI is dangerous, AI is going to provide difficulties for our model of teaching. Well, what's new? AI is just the latest version of difficulties, obstacles, and opportunities that have arisen through technological change. And, you know, in my day, there was a lot of debate as to whether we would allow calculators in class or for students to bring computers into class. And now it's ChatGPT. And I think, once again, if you're thinking about futures rather than past, we have to embrace it. We have to bring the classroom closer to life, to real life, and reflect real life in the classroom. So 3 comments on AI is it's an evolving reality. We have to think it's there, whether you like it or not. You have to think about how you address it. And there are 2 ways in which I would suggest every teacher and every school needs to reflect on AI. Is first of all to prepare the students. It's going to be there, and you have to try to integrate it in a way that allows its use to be integrated but ethical. So part of this, and I'm going to speak a lot more about skills in a moment, part of this is about training skills. It exists as a technology, it can very easily be abused, but I think the next line about you need a charter about what they can do, where they can do it, how they can do it. And of course, students being students, they will cross the line at times. But if they know what the lines are, then they'll know that they're infringing them. And that's why you also need to have a parallel skills-based component, not just a charter, a policy, but a skills-based component about thinking, what does this mean? What can you do? What can't you do? So things like critical awareness. The AI might give you an answer, but I quite like the fact that, you know, I took for granted the term artificial intelligence for a long time, but that's exactly what it is. Its intelligence is purely artificial, and it can't match human intelligence. And anyone who's using AI is at risk of really quite quickly of being found out, because the teacher knows the student, the teacher knows the student's capacities. So you find ways of testing if you have any suspicions. And very frequently, it's glaringly obvious. But, you know, this is only another step. If a student writes their essay through AI, this is only another step on from the student who had the privilege for their parents to be writing all their essays with them, or sometimes even for them. This is a slightly more artificial form of intelligence than the parent, but parent 1.0 was essentially the same technology several generations earlier. And also, it increased inequality because some students had easy access to parent 1.0 and some had none. So at least ChatGPT, offers everyone the same opportunity to cheat. Isn't that great to have fairness? So what you need to do is teach ethics, is teach critical awareness. What you're spotting Do classes about showing a chat GPT essay. Ask them to say which of these paragraphs was written by AI, which was written by the human, and so on and so on. So you're teaching critical awareness as a skill. And also, this has happened in the US for years. Students are really, they have it drummed into them about plagiarism and how serious plagiarism and intellectual theft is. It's dishonest. It's intellectually dishonest. And in the US, they're really strict about this. And more at college level than at school level, but it starts at school level. That it's heavily punished and it's seriously taught. And I think that as ChatGPT invades more of our life, being aware of ethical conduct and plagiarism is a key component in teaching the skill alongside as the responsibility that accompanies technology. So, for instance, the IB has set out its charter, and I think there's a lot more to it than I've written here. I've put here, but this is from the introduction to it, and it says, I like this bit. The simplest reason that the IB will not ban the use of AI is that it's an ineffective way to deal with innovation, and that is at the heart of it. That we have to embrace innovation and work our way with it, because the school is not the ivory tower. The school increasingly needs to be connected to external realities, and that's where most of the rest of my talk is going to direct itself. So, if we're thinking about technology in schools, then ed, like in the word, the ed comes before the tech. It's the servant, not the master. The technology. Often people get wowed by. In publishing, we did this a lot. We let our business be driven by technologists, and I was involved in over many years in technology projects which never took off. And why? It was because it was being driven by the developers of the technology rather than educationalists, and the form was dominating the content. And content is king, as they say. The content fundamentally has to be strong, and have confidence in yourselves as teachers to evaluate any technological proposition on the basis of its pedagogical credibility. And so the third part of that is the only thing that matters with the adoption of any new innovation, new technology, is does it improve outcomes? Does it do something better than what I could do? That moment about saying, now I understand why an interactive workbook is good. It's not just a workbook on a screen. It allows you to do something more. And every adoption of an innovation should be judged by teachers on what good, what better it offers. And so with that, I'm going to move on to sort of more my home ground and talk about curricula leading up to and including assessments. So here's a big question for 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, particularly coming from someone from an exam board. Exams, why? I think that there are three, there may be several others that you would enumerate, but I think that there are three typical problems with the traditional approach to doing exams. One is that we're in charge of what students learn, and in any curriculum, the subject content is relatively narrowly defined. So we're testing what we teach, and the validation of that is frequently as much for the teacher and the institution as it is for the student. And that's why I don't know if any of you have come across something called the extended project qualification. And I think that sort of approach is very future oriented, because it's not content based. It puts in place a structure, so a project that the student fills the content into, and the evaluation of it is about how well constructed the arguments, the project, the delivery is, and you build it over. But it's really interesting, that idea of having a qualification that is not defined by a preset narrow curriculum. So for any subject, you can only teach a certain small proportion of that subject for an exam. Something like the EPQ, which allows the student to pour in the content, and it provides the fabric, the structure, I think is a really interesting and forward-looking way of delivering. But, you know, first of all, so traditional content teaching is constrained by the limitations of how much you can cover, and defined by the teacher, or more frequently the exam board or the publisher, I'm afraid. But we live within the constraints that we have to, that the system imposes. A bigger problem, I think, is who we're rewarding. And traditional exams, I think, have rewarded and recognised a relatively narrow range of fundamentally academic skills. And so people who do well in exams are people who know how to work that system well. So skills that are very highly rewarded are memorization skills, are organizational, revision skills, planning skills, and so on. But it's a range that doesn't necessarily represent the broader range of skills that is required in real life. An example of this is memorization. So I'm going to ask you to remember, when was the last time that you had to remember and learn by heart a large amount of content? Anyone have a suggestion? Think of when they had to remember by heart a large amount of content. Sorry? School? When you were at school, you mean? No, it's okay. So not yesterday when you were in class. You mean when you were at school? Yeah, go ahead. Another suggestion. Sorry, say again. Oh, music, yeah, remembering music, remembering a tune. I thought remembering a part in a play was probably the last time I had to. But it's just not something we do. We outsource our memories here now, and there are so many great pub arguments that now don't happen anymore because we settle them on the moment. They could have gone on for hours in the old days. Now they're settled because content and memory is outsourced. So let's think of rewarding beyond content. Let's reward a broader range of skills than traditional skills. People who are what I call exam show ponies are being awarded for, if they're not necessarily the skills that will help people get on in life. Because the obverse of that coin is that means that we're frequently not giving recognition to students who may have a very good range of life skills, but are really bad at revising, or are really bad at exam days, where everything, their whole life, their whole future counts on what happens in 3 hours or 2 hours. And it's not fair on lots and lots of students. So we need to try and make assessments fairer. And thirdly, let's think about looking forwards, not backwards. So exams typically look backwards as a validation of the content that was taught over a period. But what it does is it disconnects levels of education. It means that when we're doing A-levels, we're not fundamentally preparing students for the rigors of higher education or the world of work. And so university teachers, as you'll see in a moment, say, students are coming to us with not all the things that they need. I'll show you some research that backs that up. When we created our new range of exams back in about 2016-17, our international exams were all reviewed and revised and rewritten then. We started not by thinking about the subject content, but by doing a huge global research project into what worked well in education systems, looking at best practice, and what were the expectations from students coming up through the school system by higher education professionals and by employers. What were they looking for? And it feels as if this is going to be really utilitarian. It says school needs to be more career focused. And you go, oh God, that's so dispiriting. You know, we want school to be a broader experience than that. The research showed the opposite, that what people are looking for is less fundamental depth of content but more a wider range of life skills. Because most of us, I keep talking for all of us, and I really shouldn't, but many of us will find that the content we learned in a great deal of depth at school and at university, very little of it we're employing in our daily lives. So it wasn't the depth of the content that prepared us, it was the rigor of the studying and the independence that we gained over our intellect. To manage our performance. It's the skills rather than the content that defined our successes. So our panel went, they were a global panel of educationalists from secondary, primary, higher education and the world of work. And they, in turn, went and spoke to thousands of contacts. And one of them, for instance, from the world of work that was interesting was speaking to the chief economist at LinkedIn, who clearly sees loads of job postings, loads of professional exchanges. And this comment of his, that it's the skills that matter the most to employers. And it's the gap that they often find. What employers find themselves doing is teaching those skills themselves. Some of the best training I've had is hardly recognized because it was a course in such and such, but it equipped me so much. It wasn't the stuff that I explicitly learned at school or at university. It was the stuff in the in-service courses that I've done since I've been at work that taught me, because it's practical, it's applied, and it's a lot of it is about behaviors that make you more successful or make things work better with other people, understand yourself better. And those things, on your CV, frequently you just write, attended a range of courses, and it's not feeling valuable enough for what it does. So let's not leave that to the world of work to have to patch these holes in a student's education. Let's try to address them whilst we're educating them, because there are gaps. The world of work is identifying a huge number of gaps in people coming up through education into the world of work. I won't go through all of these, but I'll let you read them to show why we need to narrow this skills gap. And that one on the right was the one I was saying about. 87% of university teachers say that students coming up through the school system are fundamentally unprepared for the rigors of independent study. So I think one of the responsibilities that we bear if we're thinking about the future is to narrow that gap between what we're doing, what we're teaching, what we're testing, what we're evaluating at school, and how we're preparing students for their futures. And this is just one aspect of that we tried to bear in mind as we were doing it. So what happened was that as we redeveloped every subject syllabus, alongside the content choices that we made, we knitted in a thread of transferable skills. And those transferable skills will vary from subject to subject. Clearly, the skills you need to be very good at physics are a different skill set to those that you need to be very good at English literature. Some of them are the same and are fundamental. Some of them are more subject specific. So the skill sets can change, but the structure remains the same and it's important to integrate it in whatever subject you're teaching. So it was based on these three areas: cognitive, the intellectual development; intrapersonal, understanding yourself, your reactions, your responses, and becoming more resilient, having a growth mindset, making yourselves more aware of your behaviors, and in that way managing negative behaviors and nurturing positive ones. And then thirdly, interpersonal. And this is, all of these are really important. First of all, when a student becomes independent, that they become responsible for their own study in higher education, and fundamentally in the world of work. The world of work is training for this stuff all the time. It would be nice if school gave them a head start. And interpersonal and all those things about, we teach kids to compete with each other. We don't explicitly frequently, but they're competing for marks. They're competing for grades. We need them also, and we do this, but we fundamentally need to build in collaboration, cooperation, turn taking, taking the lead, managing conflict, interrelational stuff, which is all really important in the real world and needs to be knitted into the way in which we teach. And I think frequently is. Our curricula try to make this explicit. So it's quite hard to test for for many of these skills in the exam itself. Although the point is that many of the skills, if they're intrinsically well taught, then they help to support success in the exam. Your resilience is what helps you get through an exam. Your intrapersonal skills, for instance. But right throughout the teaching, people always say, unfortunately, we have to teach to the exam. So if the exam is less narrowly based, or the exam syllabus is less narrowly content based than the teaching, it frees the teaching up to be broader based itself, to allow to teach more than just that narrow range of content. So, for instance, here's an example from the curricula for the syllabus for our English literature course. And wherever you see those little blue arrows and boxes at the bottom of pages, they invite you to reflect on the skills that you require to answer an exercise or a question successfully. Okay, so it's threaded through. So you're not just talking about what you're studying; you're talking about how you do it successfully. So it's threaded through the content. We don't just do this in the exam syllabus, we do it right through education. People frequently say that the best place to start teaching those life skills is right from reception and all the way through. The earlier, the deeper you knit it in, the more embedded, the more successful it becomes in terms of managing your students' outcomes. So that's something about the way in which we've rebalanced or attempted to rebalance within the constraints of UK international exams the syllabi of our new qualifications, or current generation of qualifications. But then something else has happened recently, which I think is really exciting, and we were talking about out of obstacles come opportunities. And there was a really big obstacle a couple of years ago, which many of you will still bear the scars of. And that is when exams couldn't happen. Because if you look at those two pictures, I struggle to see any more differences than the technology of the photography, frankly. That virtually nothing changed in an international or an academic, a UK academic exam room for 100 years. And then came summer 2021, or summer 20, wasn't it, first? And then summer 2021. And the exam boards had to kind of give up and leave it to you guys. Sorry. Because it was just broken. And that meant that we had to start thinking about change. And some of this change should logically have happened years before, but there wasn't a strong enough motivator to disrupt, to upset all the established practices until suddenly there was. And so we had to think about preparing ourselves better for the future. Talking about schools preparing for the future, as publishers and exam boards, we fundamentally had to as well. So that started a journey. And there's they put this down as being a sort of an Irish expression. They go, oh, well, if I was going there, I wouldn't be starting from here. And I apologise to any people of Irish origin, but the lesson from it is that you sort of inherit the baggage of the past. So this is how exams have been run from the point of view of the delivery. So we design an exam paper digitally. First thing we do then is we cut down a forest and we turn it into print. Then the next thing we do is we burn thousands of carbon miles couriering these forests around the world. They go into the school. The paper sits on every student's desk. They add a lot more paper themselves, and then they carbon pollute the planet again, sending it all back to us at great expense as well, of course. And what's the first thing that we do when we receive all your students' exam scripts? Well, damn me, we digitize them. We scan every page. If you can imagine that operation, these machines, we scan them all and we send them out to our examiners. And any exam paper is marked by 6, 8 different examiners. So we mark papers horizontally, not vertically. What that means is, in order to avoid bias, we have an examiner marking 80 scripts of one question, that same question, so that they're very aware of the mark scheme, but they don't get influenced by the way that they think a student is behaving. And that's a more reliable way of marking. But it's all done digitally. Why couldn't you just do everything digitally all the way? So let's take out printing the exam papers. Let's take out sending the exam paper by courier. Let's send it digitally. Let's run the exam. Once again, it's from digital. It could stay digital if we were to run it on a screen. Let's think about that in a moment. Therefore, we upload the student scripts. We no longer need to scan them. We can send the papers to the examiners. You could have really easily a pure digital journey. And in many ways, that makes a great deal more sense. And I believe that within, when Jack Ma was saying within 30 years we're in trouble, it wasn't 30, it's 5. The things that are happening in AI that he wasn't explicitly talking about, but it wasn't 30 years ahead, it was 5. And these things always happen. I say 10. In 10 years, this will be the norm of delivering exams. It could be 5. It tips that becomes the norm, because it just sort of makes sense. So that's it. So we're doing, I don't know if you've done it, but schools in Spain, schools around the world were able to conduct some of their international GCSEs in English. It works particularly well. The first iteration of our international exams were the text-based ones. Because it's very easy to transfer to doing on a screen. You lock the student's screen to the exam, you have the examiner, and schools in Spain have qualified, undistinguished from those. You can even within the same cohort have some students who prefer to do it handwritten, others on a screen in the same paper. And they've received their results this summer. Once again, remember that point I was making about the value of technology shouldn't be in, it's great that we're saving the planet and everything. Seriously great. Although I'm slightly overstating our importance. But that point about judging things on outcomes, and what was really interesting, we thought this works because it makes sense, it's practical technology. But actually, what made even more sense was when we had the students' feedback on it. And the difference for them of working with an exam on screen rather than on paper was that it increased the quality of their answers. They thought that they were able to work better. And it makes perfect sense. If you think about the way that you write in real life, when you're writing an email, you change a word, you change the order of sentences. That doesn't sound quite right. If you were writing an essay, you might discover that your conclusions didn't match what you put in your introduction. And so you can change the introduction. Suddenly, you can present, when you're handwriting, you have to have a fully formed thought, which wastes time, and then commit it to paper. Now, you can edit yourself. You think, oh, that's a good thought, and you get it down. And then you refine it. That's what we do in real life. That's what on-screen assessment does. So this is what I'm talking about. It improves outcomes, not just the technology, it's the improved outcome. The next innovation, which you may have heard about, which we've just introduced, our A-levels have been modular for a long time, and it allows you to assess closer to when you're teaching, which means that once again, you're not simply rewarding revision skills and wasting a lot of time actually having to revise with your classes towards the end of the second year of a course. You can have less time given over to revision and reward revision less by rewarding deep understanding of content closer to when you're teaching with modularity. And so we're extending that as of next summer already for a range of international GCSEs as well. So normally at GCSEs are 2 papers. Paper 1 can be taken next summer and paper 2 the following summer. So you could have year 10s doing their first paper and then moving on to year 11. It's a choice. You may say they're not going to be ready by the end of year 10, but certain students, certain contexts will be. And most of our subjects at international GCSE will be moving on screen. Some already are. from September, from this week, you could start teaching with the expectation of delivering that content in an exam paper next summer. You slightly switch the way in which you teach, but fundamentally you also gain back a lot of teaching time because you're not having to spend so much revision time at the end of the course, and you're rewarding. It's more fair. You're getting away from the exam show pony scenario and rewarding understanding of content rather than that narrow range of organizational and revision memorization skills. And of course, because you reduce the amount of content and it's still high stakes, but it's slightly less high than when you're having to do everything in one exam session, because it makes it easier, of course, to retake a paper, and you're not having to retake the whole qualification. So you can retake paper 1 during the autumn whilst you're still doing the course. If you have to retake the exam after you finish the course, that becomes really clunky and clumsy because you're having to look forward to your new studies and try and revise back and improve. And it's big. It's the whole paper. Now so you get the point. And the last point which is really exciting, what's happening next, about that journey, about what happens if, is this summer we piloted with an online school the concept of remote invigilation. You don't even have to be in an exam hall. Now, this will probably continue to be the exception in bricks and mortar schools rather than the rule. For online schools, it's sort of the holy grail that they can take their students through from end to end and examine them at home. Because a lot of the reasons why students are in online schools is because they have problems being in a physical school. They have special educational needs, they have high anxiety, they have personal constraints, medical conditions, or parents who are traveling, or they themselves are elite sports people or performers. They can't manage school. But also, of course, in a physical school, this could be useful. Well, first of all, if we, God forbid, ever lock down again, then this might be the solution, might well be the solution next time, that you can take the exam anyway. Or you too will have some students who really don't do their best on exam days. And for them, the solution to that very anxious or anxiety-inducing experience could be to reduce the anxiety by allowing them to take their exam at home. So these are the innovations that are happening, which once again, I think we should be evaluating by their outcomes. As an exam board, what we're trying to do is to level the playing field, to increase fairness, to add opportunity, to reward a broader range of skills than traditional academic exams have done. So that's my conclusion for today, is what we're trying to do is teach and not just test, that we want students to perform to their best. So we're breaking down exams, we're putting them in a format that makes them easier, not easier as exams, but an experience that is less divisive in terms of students' ability to show their best. So that, to link into something that's coming, this supports student well-being, which is so important. They're fairer and they look to prepare us for the future. So those are just a few thoughts which hopefully kick off your day of reflection to think about the ways in which we are hoping to support you to help prepare your students' futures. So thank you very much.